The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall continue to follow me all the days of this protracted experience of death, and I will dwell in the house of the most super intelligent power, source, and force of love and creation forever. What's happening? Vincent here. Just rolled out, headed to the first drop in the Chicago area. Man, my stomach is toe up. And by stomach, I'm pretty sure I mean colon or large intestine. Yes, that would be the healing and restoration. And it's mighty powerful. Whooping my ass. I didn't make it as many miles yesterday as the goal, right? The goal, I think I started out shooting for 640 on the mile. And what did we make yesterday? 513. Got to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and called it a day. Needed to do my laundry and could only manage to lay in the rack and moan and just general out of itness. And then took a while to go to sleep. Part of that is I was, my sleep schedule has been adjusted slightly later, and then time zone change on the horizon. But man, once I fell asleep, slept like the whatever they call that, the sleep of the dead flesh. It got some rest. How about that? But did not wake up feeling refreshed, certainly. And this is the level of healing where I could probably make good use of about a week of doing almost nothing but sleeping and just very basic activities. Right now, I feel like resting. That was the thing yesterday. It's not sleep. It's not when the person's drowsy or, oh, I want to go to bed. It's just, I just want to lay here and do nothing. Couldn't even be bothered to look at my phone at a certain point. Or something I needed to do and couldn't even motivate enough to, roll over and do whatever that. I don't remember what that was now. But when I'm having trouble doing basic tasks, I know something's up. Let's have some caffeine. Shout out to cold brewed coffee. And then sometimes food combinations. So I had some dark, and then I had a watermelon, one of those small watermelons, maybe. Not right after, but maybe didn't wait long enough. But then sometimes that's actually beneficial as well. So yeah, it's all happening down in the abdomen right about now. and then waking up and looking at the Google satellite view for where the delivery is, and looking at the street view, and it's like, well, that's another torture chamber of trying to back in a trailer while a bunch of bozos stand around and watch. Get there early enough, but these types tend to get to work pretty early. So this says I'll be there at 5:10 Central, and then sometimes it's so dark at these places it's difficult to see what I'm doing anyway. But what I found is I care less and less about these fools, and I know in Atlanta, the Atlanta area, one of the fools at the place, his behavior was just so out of bounds, and the opposite of loving, which is, I'm not even thinking in those terms with respect to this world. And again, we're back to the idea of guilt and being treated as if what I am, always being treated as if it must be guilty of something. And that's what it was, to be treated as if I'm guilty because I can't just perfectly back in a truck where there's, not anywhere near enough room. And, oh, well, so, other people do it. Yeah, they sure do. And, whatever NFL star you like to watch does all sorts of things in the NFL. And then when you're in your backyard with your buddies, I guess I could expect you to perform like that NFL star. Well, certainly compare me to people who can perfectly back a trailer into any space it will fit in at any time without one single error. Yeah, that's the comparison. And I call them on it. I just tell them, I say, listen, what? But it's funny how often they loop back into, well, these other people do it. It's like, yeah, I understand. And some of those are the people that I pass and they're on the interstate and they're rolled over in the ditch. Sometimes that's the same person, They had a heart attack, they blood pressure problems, fell asleep. Not wishing that on them, but there's no separation. And what I'm realizing is, as far as spiritual and psychological attacks, psychological warfare, it really comes down to, what is the being willing to accept at the level of being treated as if what I am must be guilty. That's really what it comes down to. And I'm finding less and less. And there's been a couple of places I just tell them, I say, hey, man, if drivers had union representation, I said, a union wouldn't allow this. I said, there's not enough room. A union would take one look at this place and say, oh, we don't do that, not our trucks. You have to find a non-union. We don't do this. This is crazy. That usually should, not that the goal is to shut them up, but most of these people can't be shamed in the first place. Yeah, Fort Wayne, Indiana seems kind of interesting, certainly economically depressed, but one of these places that's, there's still apparently an active mall. Not that that's a good thing, but a decent amount of traffic flowing through there on a Sunday afternoon, and a lot of business. Not that they're thriving, but unshuttered retail businesses. How about that? Unshuttered retail businesses. Just start to think, how is this happening? proximity to Chicago, perhaps, although it's like 3 hours away. I don't know. I'm thinking that at least one of these deliveries, one of these 2 drops is going to make me want to quit again. Not that I will quit, but I want to quit. And keep the wheels rolling. Keep the wheels rolling, and let's only do one extrication. It's like the 2 times I've quit the job. It's like, well, you're still doing the job, so why even bother quitting the job? Right? Let's wait until we're certain that it's all going to go through, right? And hopefully quit to be able to come back at some point in the future. Man, and I couldn't even do the stream yesterday. Now, part of that was it was a later start than normal, but dude, that was rough. And then, without becoming too descriptive, maybe there will be a bowel movement, and then I think that's what happened yesterday. And then a period of time of feeling better. And then also, once you get the winter weather plus the road trippers, the road tripping bozos on the roads, especially on the weekends, it's just, and having to start later in the day, it's too much. I mean, it really is. And in fact, only driving 520 something miles, the last couple of hours, 2-3 hours, I was wanting to just stop. I pushed through that persistently, right? Persistence. But maybe we'll get lucky. Maybe we'll just roll right up and back right into this place. Who knows? It's possible. And I'm realizing, if you look at the thumbnail, that lady she was being interviewed, all this homeless drug addict content, sort of homeless tourism, I guess, in a way. And a lot of these people that do the interviews, you can tell there's something wrong with them. Oh man, I left my taurine in the back, or did I? No, there it is. And you can tell there's just something wrong with some of these people, especially some of the guys. There's a few women that do it. But she's talking about being a prostitute, prostitute, and a drug addict, and being hooked on heroin at age 7 and all this. By her, the way she grew up. And I'm realizing as my voice cracks, more and more, a lot of these folks, not all of them, but a lot of these folks that end up strung out on the streets on drugs, a lot of them are under maximum spiritual attack for whatever reason. And some of the horrific things that I can't even take in these true crime cases anymore involving children. But when I was able to look at that stuff, and again, is this even real, right? I'm assuming it would have to be on some level. And, spiritually, there has to be something about that individual for them to be treated so nightmarishly. And the one And a lot of times it's little boys. And the one little boy, his mom, 'cause a lot of times the moms end up being complicit and charged with crimes. And, for them to try to get the lowest punishment, they have to act like the man, the abuser was real domineering and sadistic. And whether that's the case or not, a lot of the blame gets shifted onto the main perpetrator. And, this lady was talking about how, how that guy who was not the boy's father would, you know, just the things he would say and the treatment of the little boy, I don't know, it's a very small child. And it reminded me of this idea of this world treating what I am as if it must be guilty of something. That's really how the boy was treated, as if he had done something, and, and this idea of acceptance, I'm really, grief, all the stages of grief. And then, I'm reflecting more and more on the story of Christ from the Bible. And I'm recognizing that the enemy, on behalf of antithesis and lack and, lack of justice, lack of authority, more and more, I'm realizing that a lot of the Jesus story in the Bible, it's tied up in, half truths. And it's sort of this idea of just accepting, accepting this place as it is on some level, and not, philosophically understanding that externally there's no possibility of changing it. And then also recognizing, well, what I am, which is energetically and spiritually and, the indivisible force of what I am, power, source and force of love and creation. Well, that's also unchangeable. Now it grows and it expands, and of course, and imagines and experiences, perhaps, even outside of delusion. And so even some of these spiritual concepts around, internal bootstrapping and changing, and it's actually more so the unlearning, right? Again, inverted world. It's not to learn a bunch of techniques, although the spiritual practices and techniques are seemingly necessary to facilitate the unlearning, right? But it's to be taught to identify with what I am and to not identify with the horrors of this dead world. So on some level, it doesn't really matter what happens at these deliveries. Worst case scenario, I'll just drive to a hotel somewhere and move in, and say, what do y'all want me to do with this truck? Can I pay y'all to come pick it up? Because it's really not convenient for me to do that. It's funny driving all around like this in a big rig, and then I've driven so many places off the beaten path in my little car. I think I slept in my car around here somewhere one night on this little stretch. Well, not little, but stretch of road just starting to look familiar. And so the Jesus story in the Bible, this idea of dying for the sins of this world, which is that's not possible. That's a straight up lie, right? And it's borne out in humanity's reaction to such a thing. Like, let's just take it at face value that that's what happened. Well, look at what humanity is doing with that supposed great gift. And what does that say about humanity? So when we look at logic and reason and all of these dynamics, and this world certainly is very adept in having it both ways, cutting both ways. They get you coming and they get you going. And so myself, I realize I've kind of overcorrected into just sort of accepting certain things about this place based on something I've spoken on, which is consensus. All the bad things seem to be happening, and on some level have been happening since I entered into this place via my mother's matrix or womb, out of the frying pan into the fire, as it were. But that doesn't in any way justify or validate the activities or the undertakings. And we see how the system itself expertly, any complaint or notions around, well, look at what these politicians are doing. Now it's the Epstein files. Oh my God, the economy. How are we going to earn a living and all of these things? And the moment the person or the individual goes into that space, they're gaslit and attacked, which is basically like, well, now it's their job to vote or to organize or to appeal to the system and to change the system. And really, I think it's an acknowledgement of, well, and here's a part of the spiritual attack is, well, the being is the dead flesh, right? Because if Christ supposedly died for the sins of this world, what is that? That would be the dead flesh. So it's the world's own trick saying, well, your Savior died for your dead flesh, so why don't you go get on the same page with all the other meat suit inhabitants, all the other inhabitants of meat suits, and y'all get organized and fix this thing. Well, that can't happen. That's not possible. And I don't mean it can't happen because it's too arduous. I mean because there's no where to go when it comes to love and creation and expansion via the dead flesh. The dead flesh is based on the lack of those things. Right. Now, I understand that seemingly the body has systems for healing and growth as a child. Yeah, that's the subversion of the creative force of what I am within a delusory and illusory realm. Right. Remember, all of that exists within the context of the indivisible force that can never be individuated except via delusion and illusion. See? And so to have a brain and a psychology and a thought process, and as much as some would say, well, that's wrong to identify with those things, and then meaning to identify with having thoughts or having a mind or having a thought process as if that was, what I am. So, well, remember, a lot of those folks who would try to correct Benton did lose their sanity. And some people will go through a cycle of losing their sanity and then having to be institutionalized and medicated and warehoused. And, and that's not to denigrate those individuals. That's to say, well, that's never happened to Benton. Benton has maintained his sanity. The frayed ends of sanity, as it were. And not that that's a superiority, but in some ways it is. But I'm pretty sure the person who's been able to go right up to that edge of insanity probably always understood on some level, look, I am not my thoughts, I am not my brain, I am not my psychology. I think the person who ends up crossing over into insanity was probably because they couldn't tell the difference. Again, which is fine, but has nothing to do with Benton and Benton's performance. Let me do me and operate on my levels, and other people operate on their levels. Hashtag GOML. Oh yeah, I'm realizing now I never would have made all these miles yesterday. It's a stoplight. Rural stoplight hell. Yeah, there's no fucking way. A little bit of ice and snow overnight, or snow that melted and became ice, I suppose. Overall, the road's in pretty good shape. And what I'm doing is describing my understanding. And that's why the audience has dwindled. There's part of the reason, the dwindling of the audience. And, shout out to those who are still, who are sticking around. And maybe some new folks. I don't know. Hard to say. Well, they love to pull out in front of this big rig on these rural divided highways, but where you can still it's almost interstate quality, but you can make like a left turn across the whole thing. It's amazing how often somebody enters the highway as I'm approaching, and some people can't pull out if it's clear. Have you ever seen those people? It'll be clear as a fucking bell, and they have to wait for somebody to get close before they can pull out. And I'm going to try to convey this without becoming too annoyed. Now it's 47 with the flashers on because they need to be anointed. They need me to haul balls and pass them. They need me to normalize going 60. It's like, well, wait a minute. I'm driving early in the morning. I'm trying to stay away from y'all. Why do I have to get close to y'all so y'all can speed up? I don't get it. How about just go? Anyway, it doesn't even matter at this point. But it happened a lot yesterday too. Just like, what is this? And that's not even that's not even mentioning the ones who are on purpose pulling out, hoping a big rig will hit them. Oh yeah, that's a thing. It gets so bad. Sometimes I was in city driving, but again, it's a highway also. And I'm looking up ahead and I see this car and they already could have pulled out. Now, sometimes they're just staring at their phone and they don't know what's going on, but I can kind of just tell they're alert. I already got my finger on the air horn. I said, man, they're going to wait for me to get up there and they're going to pull out right across the front of this big rig. And then they're going to, either get in the turning lane in the middle, it's exactly what, or they're going to make a right turn, into the fast lane. It's exactly what happened. And they'll just hope I'm not watching and I'll smash into them. So how do I know what they're going to do ahead of time? I don't know, but I do. Not 100% of the time, but often. because everybody, all they reveal themselves through their own actions or inactions, as it may be. It's like, why are they just sitting there? They won't pull out in front of all those cars, but watch them pull out in front of this 80,000-pound big rig. You know, yeah, I leave a little more space, but I mean, come on. What are we doing? You know, I'm sick when I only made one egg drink. And again, I don't identify as a sickness, right, or having a sickness, but it's symptoms, detoxification symptoms. Because James Vanderbeek supposedly died of colorectal cancer. And I think they talked about, maybe there was some talk of so-called alternative therapies, but I only know one way to heal something like that, and that's going to be mind, body, spirit. And part of that mental and this part of the spirit and the emotional, you know, that's going to be within this human experience. You know, that's going to be tied up in a lot of, you know, embracing of what feels like an illness. And so I think that's what got sort of bastardized into the Christ story, is this idea of, you know, being tortured on his way to the further torture on the crucifix, right? When, you know, and I'm not saying any of that happened or it didn't happen, because on some level, none of this is happening anyway, if you really think about it, as far as delusion and treating this place as if it were ever fully could be real. Well, same thing when Christ was supposedly walking the earth. He walked in an unreal land, in an unreal world, waking dreams, surrealistic unreality, deja vu all over again. And wouldn't Christ have known that? And so we've lost them all with the Christ talk. And that's the ultimate lesson for Benton is it's Benton and Benton alone. It's what I am is all there is, right? That oneness, that beingness. There is no herd. There is no team sport, right? None of it exists. And this world will bide its time and bide its time and bide its time and hang out and seek to regroup so that it may attack at some point in the future. But then antithesis, right, and the servants of evil, in order to be submitted to their master, right, which is lack of abundance, lack of authority, lack of justice, lack of love, lack of tolerance. At some point, they're like, hey, boss, we can't continue to listen to this guy accurately talk about Christ. Now, it's one thing when they can mock and ridicule and get their little subtle comments and digs in based on the official fiction of the story of Christ in the Bible. But when you got a preacher like Benton, and the word of God goeth out of the mouth like a sharp sword, metaphorically, they can't tolerate that. You know, that's like an acid bath. You know, that's water thrown onto the wicked witch of the West, metaphorically. They're melting. So you see two melted to one, melted to zero. They're not here for it. And because what I am burns this world away, right? That's the separating the wheat from the chaff. What I am burns a hole in this world. So, and then that last hanger on says, well, I'm not here for the Christ talk, but I'll drop off and I'll come back in 2 to 3 minutes and he'll have moved off of the Christ talk. Oh, no, not necessarily. Maybe, perhaps. Jesus Christ is Lord of what? Not this world, certainly. That's not possible. They say Christ is on the throne, Christ is in charge, Jesus take the wheel. No, not if you mean go slave away for corporations and worship the almighty dollar, right? Not if that's what you mean. Christ is on the throne metaphorically within the context of that one force, the supreme unfolding creation, love, tolerance, justice, authority, the quickening spirit. And so the idea of Jesus Christ as Lord is, again, the ascension of the resurrected, risen Christ within the dead flesh. See? And there's no practices involved in that. Once that level is accessed on the heels of the forgetting and the indoctrinations and the brainwashing and the gaslighting of this realm and the dead flesh itself, when a being such as Benton, in the context, the performer in the context of the performance, see, having unlearned, which is what John 14:26, the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, teaching all things. So that's teaching how to unlearn the dead ways of this world, and then bringing unto remembrance. That's the result of the unlearning. That's what's left, is the knowing of what I am, not what you are, because that's, if we're in illusory, individuated land, that's your problem. I'm not involved. And so that's one of the greatest lies of this world, is that individuals are all somehow involved in and that there would be crossover and a collective guilt or shame. No such animal. Nope. And so religion can't ever be valid, because religion has to, at some point, tell the individual about themselves. Well, how is religion can't know anything about an individuated being within delusion? That doesn't make any sense. I can go within myself and learn about and discover what's there. That doesn't in any way mean that the other, what seem like other beings in their own dead flesh meat suits, are the same inside as what Benton is. You can't, there's no through line. It just doesn't work. So there can't be an organization. There can't be a religion, because at some point, the only way to have that organization was Benton would have to be pointing at people in the audience, if there was people who listened to him in the flesh, and start telling them about themselves. I have no knowledge of them. Now, deductive reasoning through watching their dead flesh, because I'm able to figure out what their dead flesh is up to. What good is that in the long run? Only the individuated being, which is really experience. I mean, that's what we're talking about at an experiential level. Only that beingness, is able to make those determinations and discernments. It's none of my business if we're within the context of individuation. So this realm wants to remove the context of individuation and then accuse Benton based on, well, hey, buddy, if you have this level of attainment and knowledge, now it's your duty to teach these people. No, it's not. It's their duty if they are what I am, to unlearn the indoctrinations of their own dead flesh and what this world of death and these games of lives has done to them. It's for them to repeat that process within themselves if they're able to, and most aren't, and that's okay. Meaning that I accept. What I am can never accept certain things about this place. And so there's certain aspects to what supposedly happens here that, the being just simply cannot accept. And still be what the being knows itself to be. Right. But then part of the rub is how to do that without becoming the accuser. Because one part of the Christ story is, I don't see a lot of, Christ behaving in an accusatory fashion towards others. Right. And now what would that be based on? Well, it's seemingly that would be based on, whether Christ knew their hearts and understood that, they were possessed of Nancy Pelosi's MS-13 spark of divinity, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. And then to say, well, the only strategy is to give them space and to treat them a certain type of way because they still have time to pull their heads out of their asses and grow and change and evolve, spirit, again, internally bootstrapping. Because to accuse them, that's not ever going to, it's simply never going to be effective. Now, some people you can, aggressively sort of just boss around and attack, and cause them to behave certain ways, but that's not what we're talking about. It has to be of their own volition, right? And again, Benton, in the context of individuation, only Benton's experience, Benton the performer and the performance, that's the context. That's always the context. So it's Benton's large intestine, receiving healing and restoration on a very high level. And then you might say, as above, so below, and then now you have the feeling of illness, right? Good pain. So the idea of the mock of Christ mocked and ridiculed in the streets on the way to being tortured and further humiliated, and then the church's notions of sort of and even the Mel Gibson movie about it, of it actually becomes almost pornographic in a way. It's to fetishize, almost like the movie Hellraiser, to fetishize, that level of pain, right? And to dress it up like a Gandhian nonviolence. Well, it's still violence. If Christ accepted all of that, that's not nonviolence, that's violence. Right. And to know for years ahead of time, potentially, or his entire life, that would be the end. That's how things would end for Jesus. But then, so what's the, supposedly crying at Gethsemane or whatever, and, basically asking, what he would have viewed, I guess, as the Father or Lord or the larger force. And again, why is Jesus in the story? Why is he having that moment of supposed weakness? Did you talk to the criminal, Jesus? Weren't you in the courtroom with the criminals? See, that's the criminal. You know, the trucking company is the criminal. They'll treat me like I'm guilty of something, right? The place I'm trying to deliver this load to, that I may be tortured trying to back into this dock, that's the criminal. See, this world is the criminal, and Jesus would have known that. So, you know, and I'm not saying it happened or it did happen. On some level, none of it happened. And again, waking dreams, surrealistic, unreality. It didn't happen at a 100% power level, meaning concrete reality. We know that. And the dreams I've been having in those restful periods of the further healing and restoration of my colon and my large intestine, one and the same apparently. You know, a lot of that is seemingly tied up in the horrors of the dead flesh and the horrors of this world of death and game of lies, right? To be under attack in a way from, you know, one's own flesh at all times, nearly. You know, the enemy, if I identify with the body, now Benton is going to think Benton is the enemy, right? Many people identify the enemy as their own thought process or their own psyche or their own personality, see? And so when I get to the this delivery, if there's mockery and ridicule, well, that's dead, you know. And, you know, did you talk to the criminal? I'll just talk about how why don't I have representation? Why am I here, you know, seemingly innocent as a lamb or a babe, you know, just never been here, never laid eyes on it, and I'm just expected to somehow fucking miracle the ass of this trailer into the dock. Oh, well, other people do it. Yeah, other people do all sorts of things I wouldn't even consider for half a second. What's that got to do with anything? Other people do it. Yeah. Just like Pinocchio, most of the boys go off to that fucking pleasure island or whatever. What's that got to do with anything? Now we're on just solid fucking ice and snow. If anybody's curious. This was the bargain that I made when I decided not to take the turnpike, just because it annoys the fuck out of me at times. So this is, I understood that there would probably be stretches of this road that were not up to snuff, and that's all right. We'll just go slower. Now, see, this says 5:30. Now you're getting into, if I have to do the wiggle at the shipper, at the receiver, they'll already be getting there. And what they do is they typically pull up in their pickup trucks and just get in my way as much as possible, and then try to say, well, why didn't you come in the other way? And I'm like, that's a blind side, and they don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. And then I'm like, exactly, you don't know what I'm talking about. But meanwhile, I'm on the verge of moving out of this motherfucker. You know, all I can think about on some level is, why didn't I I think I might have found a hotel near a Walmart with an affordable weekly rate. Not cheap like Fort Smith, but affordable. And $350 a week all in for, looks like a pretty decent place. A hotel. Although I do prefer motels on some level, if I have a car, of course, which I don't at this time. But, you know, part of me is like, and obviously checking in at this early, and well, it's still nighttime, I guess, I guess technically when I woke up, that would have been check-in time, now that I think about it. and then my own indoctrination and being taught, to do the so-called right thing. Well, don't fuck over the criminal, the trucking company. Don't fuck them over by suiting myself, right? Don't do that. Some of this reminds me that I found and it's funny kind of watching the cyclical nature of this YouTube content, because there was a time when I found a lot of interesting channels that were, somewhat personality driven. And I'm not that into people and personalities, but, as long as they can intellectually or pseudo intellectually make the whatever they're talking about interesting, that helps. But, and maybe old Benton does that around these parts from time to time. But, some of these channels have like a mind, they blow up in a small way. One of their videos gets 50,000 or 100,000 views, and then they get some, 5,000 subscribers out of it. And now they can earn, maybe at first they can earn 1,500 or 2,000 in a month. And of course, that starts to dwindle down, and YouTube starts to kind of, steer them in various directions based on money as the carrot or the stick or both. And this one guy was this millennial, I guess a younger millennial or an old Gen Z, as it may be. He definitely seems more Gen Z to me, but I can't remember the name of his channel, but he had no job, right? They call that NEET, N-E-E-T. I forget what that stands for, but not in employment, education, or training or something like that. More or less still living with mommy and daddy or moved back in with them or whatever. But, look, better to do that than slave away for a corporation to give half of that money or more to some landlord, which is probably also a corporation. And I'm just going to tell them at this delivery, I'll say, look, my job is to drive through a motherfucking snowstorm to get this stuff here. My job's really not to expertly back this bitch up. So I don't know what to tell you. It's going to take however long it takes. And I'll tell you this, every time I look in my mirror and see one of y'all, it's going to take longer. So just do whatever you want. The more people pull up in their pickup trucks and just, willy-nilly start parking in my way, it just takes, I don't care. I live in this truck. I don't care. If I need to, I'll just go sit in my truck over to the side and let y'all figure it out. I'm pretty sure we can physically unload this bitch if we have to. I mean, how bad do y'all want this stuff? And it's a contract. It's a dedicated customer, so I can't just shoot my mouth off to the fullest. But that's what I mean about this Christ story of I don't. The spirit of what I am is not tied up in accepting the humiliation and ridicule, right? Now, it's also not to necessarily get triggered and angry and all of that, right? Well, we're going to slide out into this intersection if we're not careful. Holy smokes. That's why we go slow and leave enough space, because when something unforeseen happens, I was, modulating the brake pedal in conjunction with the ABS to just barely be able to not slide into the intersection, And then the light turned green as soon as I got there, so I guess it wouldn't have mattered. But, this is my job. It's not to be able to swing a trailer around based on a lack of not near enough space. That's not my job. If that was my job, I'd go be a local driver somewhere and drive a day cab and maybe a 45 footer at some of the time, and to go to all these tight places. I'm doing all of that with a longer truck and a longer trailer. but or the same size trailer potentially. So you know, y'all can laugh at me all you want. I don't give a fuck. I'm talking to the criminal. Because if the only way to talk to the criminal is to refuse to internalize. If I internalize their worldview, then that's me failing to talk to the criminal. They're the criminal, but it's also what I am doesn't need to, within the context of death. The idea of you can't destroy death. Death is dead. Death is the lack of life. There's no the idea of overthrowing the government. What the dead? How you going to overthrow the dead government? You're going to destroy the dead government? It's like this idea of eating the rich. It's like, what do you mean? You can't eat the rich. They're too fat. You'd have to starve them out first. And once they're starved, they're no longer rich. So what are we talking about? See, it's all right there. It's all just right there. Wow, this road conditions have very much deteriorated. See, now I went from potentially leaving too early to leaving maybe not early enough. So we should be able to roll 45 no matter what. Now we're down to 40. And we got no weight in the trailer. That's part of the problem. We'd probably go 60 on this if we were fully loaded. Well, in fact, no, I know I could. Man, the water too, dude. Oh, I drank a shitload of water yesterday, like just chugging it. That's a sign of something with the healing. If my nerves are shot, something's going on, man. It's a healing and restoration, protection and deliverance. And you want to talk about spiritually attacked? How does this happen? I get to the truck stop, it's fairly early in the day. Nothing's happening. It's completely just nothing. There's nothing happening. So now I'm looking at where do I want to back in and park? I want to park on a specific row because I don't want to get blocked in, and I don't feel like doing a U-turn. And I pick my spot and I back in, but then I realize, well, people have parked while it was snowy, and you can't hardly see the lines anyway. They need to repaint the lines. So I realize, oh, I parked next to a truck that's, not between two lines. So I'm like, fuck it. I might as well pull up and then park, between the lines, and whoever's to the right of me, that'll get them in the right, and that'll get them correctly oriented at least in what was then an empty spot to my right. Several of them, in fact. Uh-oh. Sliding away there, Benton. And, it sped up a little too much. That's what that was. And, so there's a flatbed, parked behind me facing the other way. And so I get oriented and, lined up with that space. So now I'm backing my trailer up directly into the ass end of his trailer. And I'm not so good with the depth perception. Usually what I do, because I don't, every once in a while somebody will just bang into the back of your trailer. You'll be parked at a truck stop and then somebody will sort of crash into the ass end of your trailer, because they're so used to backing in, and I guess we're just going a little too fast, and whatever. Every once in a while I might just at a slow speed just barely tap into another trailer. Well, so I notice in my mirror that here comes the guy got his gloves on. He's walking all, in a specific type of getting business done way. It's a flatbed, so I assume he's, maybe he took a shower or whatever. Whatever he's doing at the truck stop, now he's going to check his load and probably hit the road, or maybe just, I don't know what he's doing. Maybe just check his load, the strap. And I don't think too much of it. And I look in my mirror, and there he is. He's going to back me in. He's wanting to do the hand motions. And, part of that is, since I'll never know how to back up properly, meaning I can't ever do it the way other people do it. So part of me is like when I have to make a tight swing backing up, I typically put way too much angle on the fifth wheel, the trailer and the fifth wheel, that pivot point. And then so I found it's easy to pull forward, do like 3 or 4 mini pull forwards, and then I can judge, because then the ass end of the trailer is still swinging, and you basically remove that tail swing, if that makes sense. And once they start seeing that, they just assume that the guy that I don't know how to drive, right? And now, we better help him, or he needs to be guided. He needs somebody on the ground making hand motions. And it's not a tight truck stop. I'm backed in far enough. I'm not in anybody's way. I could have parked that way overnight. I still wouldn't have blocked anybody in. I just took one look at him, pulled the curtains, fucking pulled the brakes, closed the curtains, and went back in my sleeper and said, fuck, I'll wait 10 minutes till this bozo fucks off, and then I'll do what I was going to do anyway. I'll get out of the truck and I'll visually inspect the distance between the ass of my trailer and the ass of his trailer. And what's wrong with that? Am I in a hurry? And why is everybody so bothered? And see, that's part of the problem at these deliveries is it makes them uncomfortable to the idea of me as a truck driver not just able to do everything exactly like everybody else does it. Well, part of what everybody else does is that if they try to leave out of Connecticut and drive through a snowstorm, half of them end up in the motherfucking ditch, and half of them are supposed to be there on Monday morning, and they get there Tuesday morning or Wednesday afternoon because they had to get pulled out of a ditch, or they had to swap trucks because they crashed the truck. I'm here on fucking time, probably early, and I drove through yet another fucking snowstorm. Like, where's the acknowledgement of that? Well, that's neither here nor there, because Benton, what you are, will always be treated as if it must be guilty of something. It's like, all right, well, okay. But I'm going to talk to the criminal. Because if this guy really wanted to help me, he would do what I would do, and he would realize that his legs ain't broken, and he would walk his happy ass all the way to my tractor. And he would say, hey, man, he'd wait for me to roll my window down and say, hey, man, you want me to help you? And then I could remain in charge and say, yeah, man, if you would go back there and just don't let me crash into the back of your trailer, which might be all he cares about in the first place. And don't do anything else. Don't start making motions with your hand. Just, I'm going to creep it back. And when I get close, maybe hold your hands up to show the distance. And then when I'm about to hit it, put your hand up to tell me to stop. We don't need this perpetual keep it coming motion. That doesn't help anybody. Because there will come a moment where the person stops doing the perpetual motion and then starts motioning their hand in the opposite direction. Well, my brain can't tell the fucking difference. All I see are hand motions. But my brain can tell the difference between hands are down and, oh, look, the hand went up and that means stop. Or look, 2 hands showing a distance. anybody's brain can figure that out, most likely. My brain can't distinguish from the back it up, bring it on back, or the hey, start going the other way with it, or the circles, make circles. Yeah, I don't know what make circles means. Sorry, my brain can't detect. My brain can't visually decode make circles. I don't know what that means. Oh, you don't? No, I don't. It'd be like me going around to everybody saying, "Oh, you didn't make a 99 on the ASVAB? Oh, it's easy. Let me tell you how." Because that's how they'll treat me. Oh, well, what do you mean? It's easy. Let me verbally tell you how to interpret these hand signs. I'm like, I can't do it. My brain doesn't have that capacity, just like your brain can't take the ASVAB and make a 99. Because if everybody could make a 99, there wouldn't be such a thing as a 99. Because it's called 99th percentile. See? And I don't accept that. So part of this healing is to recognize that many aspects of this realm will never be acceptable, and to accept them through a process of internalization that's demonic, right? That's demonic. And to also understand and accept that I have no power to change these people or to explain to them that actually I'm right and you're wrong. And that they are this way for their own purposes. And part of his purpose is, number one, doesn't want me to crash into his trailer. Number two, if somebody's watching, right, this idea of the tribe that's always watching, well, if the tribe sees him not helping, he might lose face. It's like, oh, okay. Now he's got to behave as if he's helpful. And my thing is, well, that's not help. In fact, it's making it more difficult because now instead of doing what I need to do in my mirror, all I see is some bozo making hand motions. Well, I'm not going to look at that. Why would I keep looking at that? So what I do with these docs now, unless they're just not, some people just stand there and watch and they don't really realize that that's what they're doing. And maybe they got other things on their mind and, whatever. And they just happen to be standing there. But the ones who want to stand in my mirrors and scrutinize, well, I just pull the brakes and jump out and go talk to them. And, we have a conversation. And then maybe they mention that, well, we got other things to do. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's fine. It's just please realize every time I look in my mirror and I see you, then this takes longer. So are we in a hurry or like, what are we doing? Are we in a hurry or are we not in a hurry? I'm confused. And yeah, I understand all the other truckers do it a different way. That's fine. And half of them, at some point, I passed them on the interstate and they're rolled over in the fucking median or they crashed off into the field beside the interstate. And guess who never does that? So how, those are two different people. And then at a certain point, I start fantasizing about just crashing into the building, which I may just, at some point, I may just crash into the building. Say, well, what about that? And let them suspect that I did it on purpose, but not be able to prove it. Oops. Oops. And we got trucks following too close. Hey, buddy, if you got the skill to follow that close, you got the skill to pass in that fast lane. So let's go ahead and get her done there, Bubba. Because if I was heavy like you, I could have passed me on that fast lane, no fucking problem. So are we super truckers or are we not super truckers? Which is it? And I was out there in north of Abilene, Texas. I seen about 10 of them wrapped up in the median and crashed because they thought they could pass on that. The passing lane was in far worse shape than the slow lane. And I went out there and passed a bunch of times. Wasn't even that heavy either. Heavier than this, but yeah, it wasn't even that heavy. But I know we ain't out here following too close. Get the fuck around. And hell, that's what I think half these pileups are is, people, it's almost like they want to get into a crash, but they don't want it to be their fault. It's like, hey, buddy, if you're up my ass and I crash into something and you crash into me, that you crashed because you're following too close. We both crashed. That's not I crashed and then caused the whole thing. That's the other guy following too close and also crashing. That's two separate crashes. It's not one crash. A pileup is a series of crashes. It's not one fucking thing. It's a bunch of bozos going way too fast and following too close. As far as the healing and the restoration, there's a lot of things going on down there in the old intestines, but first and foremost seems to be peristalsis, or that's the smooth muscles of the intestines pushing, moving things along through a series of rhythmic contractions and releasing, contracting and relaxing rhythmically. And as much as some folks and medical science like to say that there's no such thing as a colon that needs to be detoxified, while simultaneously acknowledging that there is such a thing as an impacted colon. Well, wait a minute. What's impacted mean? Oh, that's constipation that eventually leads to nothing can get through there other than watery discharge, right? And sometimes there has to be a physical intervention. That's what I'm talking about. Just not to the stage of needing a medical intervention. Because how do you think it all got built up to full impaction? Did that just happen overnight? Right? Did it just, everything was cleared out and then it just willy-nilly, it fucking, like a pileup a pileup in my rectum damn near killed them? This is constipation and, what do they call that? Biofilm, and there's something else they call it. I forget. And as medical science understands digestive processes, the bile serves a dual function. It's produced by the liver and concentrated in the gallbladder, and then it's combined with food that's just left the stomach into the duodenum, or the beginning of the small intestine, through, and then there's the common biliary tube and the gallbladder. It's all in one area, And the pancreas also inserts into that area for the digestive enzymes as well as bile, right? Oh. And the bile has a detergent effect to help break down lipids, fats, into small enough molecules for digestion, right? And in conjunction with digestive enzymes released from the pancreas. And so the dual function of bile is to also assist the lymphatic system, but primarily the liver in moving toxins out of the body, chemicals and toxins, by putting the toxins directly into the bile. And then where does the bile go? Into the feces. And in fact, that's why the feces is darkly colored. That's bile. And generally, that's bile that contains a bunch of toxins, right? And are you telling me that it's not possible for there to be old material lining the fucking walls of my colon in places? Because if you look at the shape of the intestines and the large intestine, there's a lot of little crevices and places for that material to accumulate. And then over time, if there's enough accumulation, and if the person lives a certain type of lifestyle, the standard American lifestyle, the next thing you know, that those muscular contractions become inhibited, right? The peristalsis. And so now certain herbs and certain healing and restoration and certain practices facilitate the removal of that old material via the peristalsis. And now we have, if you look at what the colon does, you know, it uses water and liquids, right? And it can remove, and I believe it can also, you know, facilitate, you know, liquids at the level of like a sewage treatment plant, effectively. And so that's what's going on down there. So if some of these chemicals and toxins, the old stuff, if the body knew that it couldn't deal with it properly and it put it into fecal matter, and that fecal matter was unable to exit the body in a timely fashion, and it's still hanging around, and now the body is being healed and restored, and is now able to start to move all of that stagnated material again. Of course, now some of those toxins are going to end up going into the bloodstream, which is going to make the individual feel ill. Of course, that's the headaches, the fatigue, the nausea. And then the human has been indoctrinated to view all of that as illness, and then to go to the doctor, who will then undergo a process of medical coding and billing to make a profit for corporations and to earn their salary. And what they will not do is correct the condition, see? And hence James Vanderbeek, the Dawson's Creek actor, passing away at younger than, or less old than Benton, passing away at age 48. Benton's 50, so about the same age. Vanderbeek to colorectal cancer, right? And he went to the doctors, and maybe, I'm not saying I have that cancer. What I'm saying is, if I do, my body's healing it as we speak. So I'm being healed and restored and delivered. What's the fucking difference? What's the fucking difference? And there's all these stories of these old dudes historically, although there's probably younger and younger, but most of the younger ones ain't that tough. And it's not even an insult to their generation. But, how many stories have we heard about some old man, working man, supporting his family and would never go to the doctor. And then they said one day, they said, we knew it was serious when grandpa, of his own free fucking choosing took his happy ass to the doctor. And the doctor was like, ran some tests and said, he's all laid up with cancer. I get, he's got a month to live and I don't know how he's walking around. Right. So if there's some measure of truth in that, why wouldn't I be one of those type of people? So, when I start feeling bad enough to actually say, wow, I need to go lay it down. I need to go rest. I need to go lay down. Well, I know it's pretty fucking serious. That doesn't mean it's cancer necessarily, but what's that dinging? Something ding. Oh, a time zone change. The ding of the time zone change. Hopefully, I'm still connected. Since I have two networks, looks like AT&T, the one I'm not using currently, has a way stronger signal than Verizon out here. So, although now AT&T's falling off, but Verizon's falling off more. Might need to switch it up. All right, hang on. Switching it up. Bar to almost full bars. Switching network. Man, yeah, my stomach gets again. This is woo. I think I gotta let y'all go, man. I need to ride this out, and pay a little more attention, and help facilitate whatever's going on down there. So, bye.